Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master, Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Welcome to Window on the West, where we explore all the ages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, with your hosts, Jonathan Watson, Michael Grumbine, and Dan Coates.
Hey everyone, good to have you with us on this brand new episode of Window on the West as Michael, Dan, and I continue to go through the Silmarillion. This week we're going to be reading Chapter 9 of The Flight of the Noldor. I'm here with, as I said, Dan Coates.
Hey.
And Michael Grumbine.
Howdy.
Who, despite some upheaval in his house and moving, is joining us and deigning to offer his presence. It's wonderful to see you guys. Nice to see you. It's been a while. We took a week off, but we're back. And as we go through Flight of the Noldor, I mean, this is a long chapter, so I'm hoping we can get through it all in one sitting. There's a lot in here. I think this might be probably in the top few chapters in the whole Silmarillion, and it's got one of my favorite quotes in the whole thing too, which I'm going to try and play for us here. But before we do that, before we go into that, we do like to play our game.
All that is gold does not glitter.
And this week, it's my turn. We've got 3 quotes. And these 3 quotes, there's really no combination. I decided I'm not going to go with a theme. I'm just going to see how good you guys are with just random quotes.
Random thoughts.
Let's do it.
Just
I'm
random
ready.
things. All right.
I'm ready for this.
Okay, so here's the first quote. I'll put it in the chat that we're sharing here, guys. It is as pleasant as it is unusual to see thoroughly good people getting their desserts. It is as pleasant as it is unusual to see thoroughly good people getting their desserts. All right. That's quote 1. Quote 2 is, let me grab that here. It is, in such a great, inevitable love, often love at first sight, we catch a vision, I suppose, of marriage as it should have been in an unfallen world. In such a great, inevitable love, often love at first sight, we catch a vision, I suppose, of marriage as it should have been in an unfallen world. All right, third quote. This is, there certainly does seem a possibility that the detective story will come to an end, simply because the public will have learnt all the tricks. There certainly does seem a possibility that the detective story will come to an end simply because the public will have learnt all the tricks. Although here's the common thread. Tolkien knew all these people, including himself and these 2 quotes. He was familiar with these folks. So it's not like I picked Brandon Sanderson or Dan Brown or something like that, or Joe Biden.
Joe Biden.
I kind of want to see Michael Grumbine, kind of puzzle this out verbally, so that way I can come afterwards and make an informed decision here.
Ride the coattails.
Yeah.
Of Michael Grumbine's deep thoughts. Huh?
All right, so you want me to guess first? So we have 3, not 4?
3. We're doing 3. This is a long chapter. We can't do 4.
I'm being sorely tempted. I don't know if it's because of the guile of Jonathan Watson or because it is, in fact, his style to pick quote number 2. And the reason is because it very much seems to describe the Beren and Luthien story. Although the unfallen world, it's probably C.S. Lewis actually about Perelandra, now that I think about it, because that's more unfallen than the Beren and Luthien story. So that leaves me with 1 or 3. As pleasant as it is unusual to see thoroughly good people getting their desserts. That is kind of have the negativity of the sort of backhandedness of Tolkien in that regard, where, but he did like to take down, analyze other literary genre.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 is also a possibility. So I am talking myself into 3.
Into 3
at this point. So I think number 2 goes better. Wait, okay. Maybe it is him talking about.
I'm gonna have to put a timer on this next time, man.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go with number 3.
Finally. Number 3. All right.
See, I would go with number 3 because I trust Michael so much, but that sounds like G.K. Chesterton to me. I think that sounds because he is all about the Father Brown mystery. I don't know. So this sounds like G.K. Chesterton. I'm probably wrong though. I'm gonna say the Tolkien quote is number 1.
All right. I win.
It was 2?
It was 2. Michael, you talked yourself out of it. So number 2, in such a great inevitable love, often love at first sight, we catch a vision, I suppose, of marriage as it should have been in an unfallen world. That is a letter he wrote to his son, Michael Tolkien, who I believe was stationed maybe in Africa at that point. March 1941, World War II, where he's talking all about marriage and women and relations. Yeah, it was. It's a long letter, but it's a good quote. The first quote, "It is as pleasant as it is unusual to see thoroughly good people getting their deserts," is from Charles Williams, who is also one of the Inklings. C.S. Lewis, Williams, and Tolkien are essentially the 3 Inklings who met together and read their works to each other. And then the last quote: "There certainly does seem a possibility that the detective story will come to an end simply because the public will have learnt all the tricks," is by Dorothy Sayers.
Oh, Sayers, right.
Yeah. So anyway. Wow, I think this is the first time I've won simply because I screwed you guys over and I can't pick it correctly. So I still haven't won by picking it correctly. But hey, good job. No, these are hard, right? This is kind of fun to see.
I like it.
How it's easy to think you know somebody sometimes, even like Tolkien, and something like where he's talking about the unfallen world, right? It'll make you think of something else like C.S. Lewis.
Do you know in the letter, Jonathan, he's talking about the Beren and Luthien story, or is he talking about something else?
I don't believe he's talking about Beren and Luthien. He may take part in that letter, but he's talking more about women and men relationships, how we judge each other, how we look at each other, how history has created the societies that we have between relations between men and women. Anyway, at least I think so. I didn't read the whole letter before getting that quote, but yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Well, good job. Good job. Man. Thanks, guys. Good job, me. Woo-woo. So now let's move on, because this chapter is by far the most impactful chapter we've read so far, just because it sets up so much of the rest of the books, and I love it. Has one of my favorite quotes in the entire Silmarillion in here. And so before we get started into these deep waters, Dan, do you have your first?
Dan's big thought.
My big thought this chapter is that this chapter is kind of like the original sin of the Noldor. Maybe not the original sin of in Valinor, because Fëanor is already kind of fallen by this point, but it's definitely the original sin of a large group of the elves, and they're led by Fëanor to rebel against the gods. And basically, they're living in like paradise. They're living in the Garden of Eden. I keep going back to making that analogy with Genesis, but after they do what they do in this chapter, they are completely banished. They are exiled forever, and you kind of see that as they're leaving. They encounter someone who they think is Mandos. I don't know if it ever explicitly says it, but his pronouncement upon the people as they're leaving is, "Tears unnumbered ye shall shed, and the Valar will fence Valinor against you and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Fëanor the wrath of the Valar lieth from the west unto the uttermost east. And upon all that will follow them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them," because they've all made an oath to go and get the Silmarils back and fight Melkor. So their oath will drive them, yet it will betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that they begin well, and by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason shall this come to pass. The dispossessed shall they be forever. And just that final line is like, this is the curse. This is you are now cursed. You are now the dispossessed. And that really jumped out at me in this chapter.
Yeah, it's like the final. It's speaking judgment at the final step that they're taking. It feels like that final moment of being cast out of the Garden of Eden, right? Mm-hmm. The angel with the sword being set as a guard, and it feels in the same way. Like, look, this you're going to have to. Women will bear children and men will die by the sword, right? That's kind of the punishment, the ideas of what you've done by taking this oath.
Yep. And immediately after the paragraph that you read, Dan, he actually says something very much like that. He says essentially, for though Eru appointed to you to die not in Ea, and no sickness may assail you, yet slain ye may be, and slain ye shall be, by weapon and by torment and by grief. And your houseless spirit shall come then to Mandos. There long shall ye abide and yearn for your bodies, and find little pity, though all whom ye have slain should entreat for you. So this is the punishment of the blood of their kin that they've spilled. And he interestingly finishes by saying that, and those that endure in Middle Earth and come not to Mando. So now we could be thinking of Galadriel, for example, and the few Noldor Glorfindel who survive. Those that endure in Middle Earth and come not to Mando shall grow weary of the world as with a great burden, and shall wane and become as shadows of regret before the younger race that cometh after. The Valar have spoken. So he's foretelling that not only will they be slain as a punishment for their blood, their murder, but they will also, those that aren't slain will wane and diminish and become lesser.
I never noticed how that is a direct call to even Galadriel saying, "I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel."
Yep.
In the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, it's good. It's a direct callback. Call forward.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I do like the idea that, I mean, this is, if it's not the original sin, it's the moment that cascades, that it's the first pebble that creates the snowball that destroys everything in the future, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was Dan's big thought. We should probably at least talk about how the chapter flows, right? Because
well, speaking of the beginning of the chapter, the one of the things that really stood out to me this time was the idea that Yavanna has a similar relationship to the trees that Fëanor does to the Silmarils, because as Fëanor says, I cannot remake this. Yavanna says the same thing, where she says, "The light of the trees I brought into being, and with an Ea I can never do so again. Yet, but I had a little of the light, I could recall life to the trees, ere the roots decay, and then our hurts should be healed, and the malice of Melkor be confounded." And though, and they're kind of telling like Fëanor, like, well, hey, you go and you break your stuff so that we got the trees back. But then Fëanor is essentially saying, like, I'm gonna, my heart's going to be broken too. Let's see, he writes, "For the less even as for the greater, for the less meaning Fëanor, as for the greater meaning Yavanna or the Valar, there is some deed that he may accomplish but once only, and in that deed his heart shall rest. It may be that I can unlock my jewels, but never again shall I make their like, and if I must break them, I shall break my first, and I shall be slain, first of all the Eldar and Amen." And I find that a really appropriate, like it speaks to my heart in the sense that like when you put your heart and soul into something and somebody else comes in and breaks it. I mean, I'm sure Yavanna's heart was broken that the trees became lifeless and dead and all their light was gone. But in the same way, because she had put her whole being essentially into raising these up, and in the same way, Fëanor had put everything that he could into creating these Silmarils, and his heart, his life would be broken if they broke those too. I found that a neat parallel that I hadn't really experienced before in reading these.
Right, and we get parallels of different types with that, because Fëanor says something similar, right?
And then I like how Aule is his defender too, where he tells Tulkas, like, "Come on, Fëanor, dude, get with the program here. Like, the Silmarils light isn't your own, and yet you're keeping it from everybody." And then Aule says to him, "Be not hasty. We ask a greater thing than thou knowest. Let him have peace yet a while." It's the Valar are not a monolithic mind. They have their own approaches to things, and I think that we see that in the sins of the Valar that occur when Manwë can't see evil, when Yavanna and Tulkas can't understand Fëanor's point of view, and when Aule kind of pushes back against them and says, "When you create something like this, give them a minute. Like, this is a huge deal."
Right, and we see Nienna takes a part too. It's interesting. I had forgotten about this, but she washes. So there's still defilement of some kind from Ungoliant on the trees, and she washes them away with her tears. Then Fëanor is told about the death of his father, which explains Mandos' comment that he wasn't the first. He wouldn't have been the first to die if he had broken the Silmarils, and then Fëanor names Melkor Morgoth, and so this is the naming of Morgoth, or of Melkor as Morgoth, and that's what we refer to him always ever after.
I think, and one thing that just occurred to me just now actually was the line that when he found out that his father was slain, Fëanor ran from the Ring of Doom and fled into the night, for his father was dearer to him than the light of Valinor or the peerless works of his hands, and who among sons of elves or of men have held their fathers of greater worth? He held his father of greater worth than the Silmarils, than Yavanna did of the trees, right? It was the greatest worth. And so really, now that I think about it, his pursuit of Morgoth stems from the fact that he loved his father so much. Not that he coveted the Silmarils so much, because even the light of the trees, the light of Valinor, was less important to him than the love he had for his father. Maybe that's reading a little bit too much into it, but I feel like that humanizes or elfinizes him a little bit more from just being the greedy, lustful, oath-making king who is willing to do anything to get Silmarils back, but he probably wants to do anything to hurt Morgoth and get the Silmarils back in the meantime, because Morgoth killed his father, who he holds more dearly than the light of the Valinor, which is inside the Silmarils. Maybe that's too deep of a read.
So I don't think it's too deep. What's interesting to me is two things can be true at once, right? So Tolkien's telling us clearly that he holds his father dearer than everything, which is amazing considering what he's just said, that if he breaks the Silmarils, he's going to die himself. So he's holding his father above that. That's true. But when I jump a couple pages to the oath of Fëanor that they all take, it is focused on the Silmarils. It's focused first on Morgoth as the great enemy. It says Fëanor's exhorting the Noldor, and he says, "War shall he have, and hatred undying. But when we have conquered and have regained the Silmarils, then we and we alone shall be lords of the unsullied light and masters of the bliss and beauty of Arda. No other race shall oust us." So he's kind of combining a lot of elements there, right?
Yeah.
So he doesn't mention his father anymore, but although we do know that personal hurt was deeper than even the Silmarils. But when he's exhorting his people and he gets them to swear an oath, the very next sentence, he's calling upon the Silmarils, and he's appealing to their being lords of the unsullied light, because we have to remember there's no more light in Aman from the two trees except from the Silmarils. So all we have left is starlight in the world, I guess, because there's no sun and moon. So now they're going to be lords of the unsullied light, and then masters of bliss and the beauty of Arda. So basically, they're going to rule Arda, and we know that appeals, for example, to Galadriel in her youth, and that's why she goes and takes. She doesn't take the oath, but she goes with them.
Yeah, to be a master of a land.
Right. And that is something that's worth pointing out, especially because we have the Rings of Power series soon upon us, and
but that's just because never mind. I don't want to get into it. It's too much. That's for another episode. It's coming.
We're not supposed to date ourselves too much in these podcasts.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, between the oath and between his father dying, we have, I think, the other major event, which is Morgoth escaping from Valinor with Ungoliant.
Yes.
Part of me always likes seeing Morgoth. Morgoth's kind of put into his place, and he has to be saved, which which you wouldn't really expect, because that means Ungoliant is crazy powerful too, considering Morgoth is the most powerful of all the Valar, and he has to be saved by Balrogs. The back and forth that they have, where she says, I've done my bidding, and I hunger still, and Ungoliant says, you took all those gems from Formenos, from Fëanor's hoard. I will have all of that, yea, with both hands thou shalt give it, as he said. And then Morgoth surrendered all the gems to her, one by one, and grudgingly she devoured them, and their beauty perished from the world, huger and darker, yet grew Ungoliant. But her lust was unsated. With one hand thou givest, she said, with the left only open thy right hand. In his right hand he held the Silmarils. So for the whole time, he's been giving her these less than gems, these gems that clearly aren't the tippy top of the valley, the cubic zirconia, Middle Earth.
Although I'd like to point out that given that Fëanor creates the Palantiri at the same time that he creates these other gems, these cubic zirconia, these cubic zirconia would probably be objects of legend in their own right.
Well, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, you can have a bad cigar, but it might come from a good company, and you might be like, nah, maybe you like it a little bit more because the maker was better. It's just like Fëanor made this gem, so it's worth something, It has this anyway, but yeah, and so
Morgoth is really regretting not giving himself some pockets. He could have been like, hey, my hands are empty. You got everything, and
I've given with both hands. And then we can get the bad reference to the Hobbit. What has he got in his pockets? Except this one asked by
maybe that was the original inclination he had for this line, was to actually say, or have her say what. And okay, anyway, we're getting too far afield in this. So he gives her so he doesn't give her the Silmarils, and she ends up binding him up, which is still amazing to me. That she's more powerful than him in that sense.
Didn't the text say something?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Didn't the text say something about how she became so powerful because Morgoth lended her some of his power? Something to that effect?
Yes, but Ungoliant had grown great, and he less by the power that had gone out of him. And she rose against him, and her cloud closed about him, and she enmeshed him in a web of clinging thongs to strangle him. What we have to remember from the previous chapters that Ungoliant has drained the wells of Arda, these wells of liquid light that were from the trees. They're like lakes, essentially, of light.
Yeah.
And she's grown more and more powerful as time. Clearly, Morgoth was greater than her when he first approached her in the south of the land of Valinor, but then, she's drained the trees, she's drained the wells of Arda, she's grown larger each time, more powerful, and now she's eaten all the gems, which, if you remember, these gems are not just sparkly gems. They actually contain light and give it back in different forms. Not as great as the Silmarils, but they're the lesser forms of the Silmarils. So she's at her height, the height of her power, and Morgoth has put forth power, and so he's no match for her. And so he screams, and he actually breaks the land with his scream, and probably things wouldn't have gone well from there if not for the Balrogs, who I don't usually think of as like bodyguards, but from their time in. From the one Balrog's place in Lord of the Rings. But here we find, of course, they are his servants, and they come to his aid, and with their whips of fire drive Ungoliant away.
And we don't know where she goes.
We know where she goes first. So it says, we
don't know where she ends up.
Yeah. She quailed and turned to flight, belching black vapors to cover her, and fleeing from the north, she went down into Beleriand and dwelt beneath arid Gorgoroth in that dark valley that was after called Nan Dungorthib, the valley of dreadful death, because of the horror that she bred there. For other foul creatures of spider form had dwelt there since the days of the delving of Angband, and she mated with them and devoured them. See, people shouldn't say there's no sex in Tolkien. There's plenty of sex going on here.
Okay.
Well, sex and cannibalism all at once, I guess. She's eating them. And,
wow. I don't want to have to put the explicit rating on the podcast, so let's move on.
And so it says of the fate of Ungoliant, no tale tells, yet some have said that she ended long ago, when in her uttermost famine she devoured herself at last.
She's the first black hole. In a way, right? She devoured herself. Black hole collapses in on itself. So that's right. No, but and she's also, of course, the progenitor of
Shelob.
Shelob. Wow, it wasn't coming to me. Of Shelob, who is clearly a far less impressive creature than she would have been,
right,
at her height.
Right, but
It's interesting to me how all of the people that make very evil, bad, selfish decisions in this chapter, they all kind of get their just desserts. So you're talking about Ungoliant devouring herself. You have Melkor, who hangs onto the Silmarils and ends up like burning and just charring his hands, and forever after that he has this pain and this anger that he always has to bear. You have Fëanor, who leads all the Noldor out of Valinor, and interestingly enough, the Valar don't stop them, despite what the lie was that they want to rule over you. They want to take control of you and not let you be free, and then they just let them walk out. Like, oh, there's the door. See you later.
Yeah, right.
But he ends up leading his people. They end up killing a bunch of other elves in the kinslaying, and then he basically like abandons them, like crossing over into Middle Earth. Like he leaves a lot of them just to die or to fend for themselves. And it just seems like the results of all these things, there's always a consequence. There's always they never get what they want, it seems like.
Yeah.
Right, and all within one chapter too. And some of them, they're all they're getting their desserts pretty quickly. Although a lot of their desserts are just foretold in that quote from Mandos that we read about what's going to happen to them because of their choices, their bad choices. Yeah, the quote about I like that too, Dan, where Morgoth gets burned. He says his hands were burned black by the touch of those hallowed jewels. Remember, they had been hallowed by Varda. And black they remained ever after, nor was he ever free from the pain of burning and the anger of the pain. That crown he never took from his head, though its weight became a deadly weariness. And the crown was when it referred to, after escaping from Ungoliant, he actually flees to Middle Earth and builds the threefold peaks of Thangorodrim, and mightier fortress even than he had before. And basically, this is his home now. From here till his end in Middle Earth, he stakes himself out as, and I quote, he called himself king of the world. So, in Tolkien, everything, there's echoes. Down is supposed to be everything that comes before is like echoing. So clearly he's echoing Leonardo DiCaprio, Titanic. Sorry, it's terrible.
Oh,
I know, it's terrible.
Horrible.
King of the world.
How dare you?
So, Leonardo DiCaprio is a forecast of
yeah, what's to come. That's crossing seas and ice, right?
That's so interesting how he gets the Silmarils. He gets what he wants, and he puts them in this crown and wears them, and they're like a weariness to him. Like he gets what he wants, and then it's just like, ugh.
He gets what he wants, and it's not what he wants.
Ugh. Yeah.
just like the Noldor.
It's a little kid who just can't admit that they're wrong and will just keep dealing with the pain and the anger and the hatred and the frustration.
That's right.
And say, no.
This doesn't hurt at all.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Party isn't.
Yeah, so he goes over, right? He ends up in Middle Earth away from Aman and Valinor. And this is the point at which we get into Fëanor and the kinslaying, where, they've taken the oath. He's convinced the Noldor to follow him, though some begrudgingly. Fingolfin and Finarfin follow, but only because it's their kin, right? That's pretty much the only reason. And I think Tolkien wrote only a tithe of the Noldor stayed, so 10% of the Noldor stayed in Valinor. So the messenger comes before they have the kinslaying at Alqualande. The messenger from Manwë comes and says, against the folly of Fëanor shall be set my counsel only. Go not forth, for the hour is evil, and your road leads to sorrow, right? So they're telling him not to go, but this is where you're like, well, Fëanor turns to him and says, say this to Manwë Sulimo, High King of Arda, Fëanor cannot overthrow Morgoth, at least he delays not to assail him, and sits not in idle grief, and it may be that arrow has set in me a fire greater than thou knowest. Such hurt, at the least, will I do to the foe of the valor, that even the mighty in the ring of doom shall wonder to hear it. Yea, in the end they shall follow me. Farewell. And I was like, yeah, he's doing something. The Valar are sitting around, biding their time, not really caring what Morgoth is doing. Not, it's like a bad military leader who's like, I just need more reinforcements before I go out and fight the battle. Like, no, Fëanor, you go out and you do something, and you take them before they have time to, raise up their fortifications and dig the moats around their castles. He's going to go and do something. And to me, that's a little rah-rah moment where I'm thinking like, yeah, Fëanor's right. He's doing something, and they're not.
Well, I think we are meant to have sympathy for Fëanor. I mean, he speaks powerfully and with truth. He speaks so powerfully that even, quote, even the herald of the Valar bowed before him as one full answered and departed.
I love that.
So the herald of who was probably a Maiar of some sort, bows before him, and basically he gives a great answer, and he's absolutely right. This is exactly what the Valar do, and I to reread that part that you just read, Jonathan. It says, he says, if Fëanor cannot overthrow Morgoth, at least he delays not to assail him and sits not idle in grief. So, which is exactly what the Valar are going to do. They're so sad for the loss of the two trees, they just sit idle in grief while Morgoth escapes with Ungoliant. And so, I think we can sympathize and empathize with what the Noldor are feeling right now. It's a really interesting juxtaposition that Tolkien is doing, because he's making it clear that what they're doing is wrong, is going to lead to grief, but we see some virtue in what they're in. At least they're trying to react against the evil. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and it's from there that he moves on. He leaves, and then they get to the Teleri.
So the Teleri. So I mean, just to recap, we've mentioned it a couple times, like the kinslaying. But just to recap, essentially the Noldor go, and they can't cross the ocean to chase after Morgoth, and the only other path is to follow into the extreme north with the Helcaraxe, the grinding ice, and they know that's going to lead to a lot of death on their part of their own people. So they try to convince the Teleri to give them their swan ships. The Teleri resist, even though Fëanor tries to first convince them through friendship, and then he starts mocking them, and he loses his powers of demagoguery fairly quickly.
I love that he calls them faint-hearted loiterers. I'm like,
yeah.
That cuts.
That's right.
It's very Trumpian. He hits him with a nickname. Oh, you're sleepy Teleri. I don't know. Don't want to do anything. Very lazy.
Teleri.
Yeah.
Oh no, Fëanor is Trump.
Fëanor is Trump.
Now it's not going to leave my mind. Thanks, Dan. No. And he makes a claim. He says, in huts on the beaches would you be dwelling still, had not the Noldor carved out your haven and toiled upon their walls. And then comes this, my favorite quote ever, from Olwe, who's the head of the king of the Teleri and one of the original elves and the elven ambassadors that first made the journey to visit Valinor, and then came back and convinced his people to come. And he said, we renounce no friendship, but it may be on the part of a friend to rebuke a friend's folly. And when the Noldor welcomed us and gave us aid, otherwise than you spoke. In the land of Aman we were to dwell forever as brothers whose houses stand side by side. So he's essentially calling them out and saying, we're brothers. We're not. There's no lesser or greater here. But as for our white ships, those you gave us not. So he's kind of slapping down Fëanor's. Basically, we claim that we gave you everything and you'd be nothing if it wasn't for us. He said, always says, we learned not that craft from the Noldor, but from the lords of the sea, and the white timbers we wrought with our own hands, and the white sails were woven by our wives and our daughters. Therefore, we will neither give them nor sell them for any league or friendship. For I say to you, Fëanor, son of Finwë, these are to us as are the gems of the Noldor, the works of our heart, whose like we shall not make again. So we have Elwë echoing what Yavanna said, and then what Fëanor said, which is basically, we can only do this great work once. For Yavanna, it was the true trees. For Fëanor, it was the Silmarils. And for the Teleri, it's their swan ships.
Yeah, and it harkens back to the things that you destroy the thing that they put their heart and soul into, and that is a death in and of itself. We're harkening back to Yavanna versus Fëanor.
Unshockingly, Fëanor does not accept this answer, and does what he's good at, which is draw a sword on kin. And a battle ensues. And at first, there's a parity because there's more of the Teleri than the vanguard, which Fëanor's with. But then the rest of the Noldor arrive, and the Noldor. They have arms and armor, and they're prepared for war, and so they overthrow and slay the Teleri and take their ships.
Yeah, and when you think, since Fëanor, the Noldor were the first to actually construct arms and armor, and I believe Tolkien writes that pretty much the Teleri only had bows. It's essentially people with swords against people with light sticks, and because I don't believe that if you follow the progress of the narrative, they wouldn't have constructed any arms at all. There would be no swords, there'd be no helms, there would be no hauberks, there'd be no shields. It'd be just them and their bows and arrows, because they would hunt maybe.
Right, probably some spears or harpoons or whatever.
Spear fishing was probably a thing.
Right. Right.
They're out
So
there
they
with the
could
flounder.
definitely use those in need,
Yeah.
but nothing compared to the arms and armor of the Noldor.
Yeah, completely. I'm sure it was an absolute massacre. And this is the point at which we see Galadriel come up on a high hill while they're battling and say, "To arms! To me, Noldor! Come fight with." Never mind.
Nope.
No, she doesn't do that.
Or
I
not.
thought it says she was a warrior.
This is where she has that big giant like 5-handed sword, and she
Yeah, she swings it and she cleaves the crowns of all the Teleri around her.
That's right.
and then she man spreads.
Jeez.
As one does.
Oh yeah, just look up the was it Empire Weekly covers of Galadriel if you'd like to see that. Interesting.
It isn't here, right? It's in one of the other works of Tolkien where it talks.
I think it's Unfinished Tales where
Yeah.
he says she defended her kin against the Teleri.
Right. That essentially she came upon the battle with some of her kin. They didn't know who it was who started the fight, and so she fought to defend herself against the.
Yeah.
You got to remember the Teleri outnumber the Noldor tremendously. They're very poorly armed and armored, of course, as we've discussed, but they do have the advantage of numbers because we're in their home on their home turf.
Right.
So anyway,
so they go in. They take the boats. I'm guessing Ulmo gets angry, or the Lords of the Sea do.
Yeah.
And many of the boats are cast upon the rocks, and they end up further north. And I think at this point, is it Finarfin turns back? But in that hour, Finarfin forsook the march and turned back. So Fingolfin's brother, right?
Yeah, so that's
I'm trying to remember all the names.
No, that's correct, but you have to remember. So if you picture it, the boats are traveling north, and there's a lot of people not on the boats, and so that's when they encounter Mandos on the hill that Dan read the quote from at the beginning in Dan's Big Thought, and then so Mandos pronounces his doom very, very powerfully, and at that moment, Finarfin of the three leaders turns back with his people. So some of the Noldor remain, not just the tithe, as you mentioned, Jonathan, but this is a whole group of them that go back and they're forgiven. It's explicitly said that they're forgiven by the Valar.
Yeah, and this is where once they reach the northern part of the encircling seas, essentially, the final horrible act by Fëanor. I guess the beginning of the final horrible act where he decides, everybody else, you're not with me anymore. It doesn't really matter. I'm here just to cross the seas. We can't cross the hell cracks, right? The grinding ice, essentially, think of Antarctica, but with icebergs blocking your path every step of the way. That's the way I think about it. And so he decides, since he and those loyal to him are in control of the remaining ships, they set sail and leave. They just leave all the rest of the Noldor there, right across there, including Fingolfin and Turgon and all the the friends of Fëanor's children. And bitter, rough. This would have been a better show than the Rings of Power, but they didn't get.
Well, I mean, what a show! Like this chapter alone, so you have this incredible arc of. If you watch Fëanor in this chapter from start to finish, and you just told us the finish there, Jonathan, it starts with Fëanor being asked to give up the Silmarils, and the great work. And if he does so, he mentions, "If I do so, I'll die." So we feel for him. Like this is a terrible thing to ask him to do. And then he gets the news that his father's been murdered, and he runs off. And who wouldn't be sympathetic to him at this point? And then he riles his people up and gets them to make that the vow, and gathers his armies. And although this is not something that's good in and of itself, at least it's something where now he's sort of the leader of his entire people, and he even answers adequately the herald of Manwë who comes and he sort of gives his own speech in retort, and we're told that it's impressive enough to make the herald leave. And so that's him at his sort of the heights of as king, and then he gets to his next point is he gets to his kin, the Teleri, can't convince them, so he slays them. So he's crashing and burning. And then finally, he betrays his own people, not just elves, other types of elves, but in the final chapter,
he betrays those who were loyal to him and followed him, not just the Noldor who stayed.
So he's not even a murderer of kin, but now he's a betrayer of his own people who are loyal to him.
It reminds, I don't know if you guys, have you watched Yellowstone, the show Yellowstone at all? Yeah, it reminds me, he's like the John Dutton. John Dutton? Is that his first name? Yeah, John Dutton. The Kevin Costner character, right? He's trying to protect his land, and he's going to do anything it takes. And if you did this as an actual performance, as an actual like long series streaming TV show, you can make Fëanor this character that you love to hate, and you hate to love all at the same time. Yeah. Like you do with the Duttons in that, like Rip Wheeler and all those crazy characters in that show. It feels a little bit like that, where you're like, well, they're just trying to protect their land. He's just trying to get what was stolen from him and seek revenge against the villain who murdered his father. But then he does all these evil deeds along the way, and you're like, I'm just not with you anymore. And then he does something good, and you're like, okay. And then the bouncing that you'd get with a character like Fëanor for your emotions would be that the chasm between the good and the bad with him could be performed incredibly well, I feel like. Anyway,
it's true. It's a real amazing. I mean, it's just terrific writing by Tolkien, showing us in one chapter what he can do with an unbelievable character like Fëanor.
Speaking of terrific writing, he leaves those loyal to him on the shores of Aman, right? I'm always like tripping over the geography was never my specialty in school, so I'm still learning it here in Middle Earth. However, so he leaves them there, and then Maedhros, the eldest of his sons and a friend of Fingon, ere Morgoth's lies came between and spoke to Fëanor and said, "Now what ships and rowers will you spare to return? Because they haven't burned the ships, they haven't done anything yet. And whom shall they bear first? Fingon the valiant?" And then Fëanor laughed as one Fey, and he cried. And I love this line. And I love this line. I don't know if you've heard it in the Silmarillion audiobook, but the way he says it with sort of the malice and the anger, the bitterness, and even the villainous humor that he has. So I'm gonna play that here because I just love the way that he says it.
None and none. What I have left behind I count now no loss, needless baggage on the road it has proved. Let those that cursed my name curse me still, and whine their way back to the cages of the Valar. Let the ships burn.
Yeah, I just like the way that the reader there, he reads that aloud. It's amazing. Anyway, so that's probably my favorite line of this whole chapter, where he just says, "What I have left behind, I count no loss." Like, he is just so bitter. He's angry. He just needs the Silmarils. He's out for revenge. Needless baggage on the road, it has proved. They're slowing me down. They're dragging me. They're taking me away from my ultimate goal. Let those that cursed my name. And now it's not just that they're not fast enough. They're baggage. Now that they're the ones who cursed his name, apparently, let them curse me still and wind their way back to the cages of the Valar. Let the ships burn.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, you described it well, Jonathan. It's a full arc into villainy. Like, this is complete villainy now. There's no more sympathy that you can have for Fëanor when he turns against his own and even people that were supporting him in this way, and just full on, betrays them with hatred and bitterness. Yeah. This is one of my, let's see, I guess spoiler alert, not really spoiler alert, because it's just my personal opinion. But my favorite of the Noldor has always been Fingolfin, and so we see here a portion of his character which is kind of interesting in his reaction to what Fëanor has done in burning the ships. Far off, of course, he's there across the ocean, the sea, which is not too far across the sea, obviously farther than any hope of traveling there except over the ice. But it says, "Then Fingolfin, seeing that Fëanor had left him to perish in Ahriman," there's the answer to your question, Jonathan, of what land they were in, "or return in shame to Valinor, was filled with bitterness. But he desired now as never before to come by some way to Middle-earth and meet Fëanor again." So he's just filled with this, like, desire, like he matches almost Fëanor's a fire with we're gonna make it. We're gonna do what nobody's ever done before or since, and we're gonna travel over the grinding ice and come to Middle Earth. And it's told that they did that and lost many elves. And then it says, as the final line of this chapter, small love for Fëanor or his sons had those that marched at last behind him, and blew their trumpets in Middle Earth at the first rising of the moon, which is a cool poetic line, because of course we don't know about the moon yet. He's just foreshadowing foreshadowing the moon, the rise of the moon.
Tolkien is the master of the final sentence. It's
Yeah,
he ends chapters so well.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
I love it.
So that was our chapter.
That was good. Yeah, I mean, it sets up so much, and though it's not my favorite chapters of the Silmarillion, there is so much in that one. I feel like even the 45 minutes or so we spent on this feels so brief and feels so little.
Yeah, this is a full one, and it has poetic power, and it's the origin of all the woe and sorrow that's going to come for many, many pages after this. Is all this chapter's the seed. This is where it all comes from.
Yeah. So then next week we're going to get into not the Noldor, which is of the Sindar, and what happened to those elves that didn't actually cross the sea, that weren't pulled in a neat floating island to the shores of Valinor. So yeah, of the Sindar, we'll do that next week. But before we get into that, we do have our weekly.
If You Like Tolkien.
And this week, I know, Tolkien really only wrote two stories, I guess, what's the way I'm trying to put it? He only wrote two published books. He wrote The Lord of the Rings and he wrote The Hobbit. Everything else is relatively short compared to that, right? You could say maybe, I mean, there's Farmer Giles of Him, there's the Adventures of Tom Bombadil, Leaf by Niggle, but they're not full on story arcs in the way that The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. However, posthumously, right, we have the I think 12 volumes of the Middle Earth. You have Unfinished Tales, but all those, you have the Silmarillion, and all those are relatively brief stories of characters told in expository format. There's not a lot of interactions necessarily between the characters that you get in something like The Lord of the Rings, where you build the relationships between characters, except for one that I think comes closest to that, and that's the Children of Húrin. And this book was published 2014, maybe. Let me find it real fast here. Apparently it's not right there. Anyway, but what it does is it tells the story of the Children of Húrin, which Húrin is one of the bravest men who fought with the elves at the great battles. I don't remember which one anymore. 2000. Let's see. 2000. Oh, well, this was in 2007. Was it really 2007? Wow, a lot earlier than I thought. In any case, I recommend this if you're looking for a story. It is not a happy story like The Hobbit. It's not the good guys win in the end story like The Lord of the Rings. You could say somewhat the good guys win. In any case, I'd recommend it. It's kind of it's a tougher read, but it's far more interesting than if you go read Beren and Luthien, the published book that they had that came out some years back too. It is more of a tale to be enjoyed if you're an adult, really, than I think a lot of his other posthumous works. So anyway, I recommend Children of Húrin. You've read it, right, Michael?
I have. Yep.
Dan?
It's more of it is more in the tragic,
yes.
realm of the tragic, but the tragedies of Shakespeare are the best of Shakespeare. So I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And if you've read the Silmarillion, you're like, well, that was kind of dry at times. You're like, and I would recommend going to this because it's a step back from some of the dryness and some of the expositoriness of the Silmarillion. So,
definitely is.
Yeah, I believe you gifted me a copy before you moved off to a free state. So I have yet to read it. I was going to do the Silmarillion first and then hop into that.
You know what? You could read when we get through it after reading it in the Silmarillion. This is like the extended edition.
Oh, okay, cool.
Right, there will be a shorter version of it in the Silmarillion.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, next week of the Sindar. Thanks for joining us. Please give us a review on your podcast app of choice. That's the way to help people find us. We would love to share our love of Tolkien with more people and to share the original Tolkien, because so many people are going to experience and have experienced it in ways by other means, whether Peter Jackson's films, whether Ralph Bakshi's 1970s versions. Yeah, exactly. And now upcoming, and The Hobbit. We won't name that one. And upcoming Amazon's Rings of Power. But going back to the original is so much more fulfilling, so much more rewarding than watching somebody else's interpretation. You get to experience it in your own head. You get to see these characters interact in ways that can't be put to a screen. And I think that's worth a lot. So give us a like. Give us a great review. We'd appreciate that. 5 stars is nice. And then if you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, share, tell your friends about it. We appreciate you. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next week.
Take care.
Michael, Dan, and Jonathan want to thank you, the listener, for joining us. Visit us at theonering.com, your source for everything Tolkien, where you can comment on this episode and join the conversation. This is Austin Robertson, bidding you farewell. May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks.